Welcome to episode 412 of Find Your Food Voice. Today is a conversation with Wendy Lopez, all on diabetes and PCOS. Let's get to it. Hey there, Voice Finder. Julie Duffy Dillon here, your host and registered dietitian. I am excited to unpack this episode where I am talking with Wendy Lopez, who is one of the co-founders of Diabetes Digital. And we are really getting into the weeds of PCOS and diabetes, and in particular, how they're connected, why are they connected, and how can you, someone who is a voice finder, so you are trying your hardest to reject diets, to recover from your eating disorder, and also manage this really tough chronic condition. Well, we go into things like GLP-1s, continuous glucose monitors, and all the fear that is dumped on you by the healthcare team. We also talk about some lab tests and lots of other things under the sun. And I was so glad to actually have this conversation with Wendy because I briefly got to meet her in 2019 when I was a part of a weight inclusive podcast panel with Wendy. We didn't get a chance to really chat and get to know each other. So this was really great for me to be able to connect with her more. And I'm excited about some of the projects that we're doing now behind the scenes that we'll tell you about later. But this episode is one that I know you're going to find to be really helpful, especially if you have PCOS or diabetes or you know someone who does. Before I share this episode, I want to let you know a little bit about Wendy. Wendy Lopez is a nationally recognized registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist with a strong commitment to making nutrition education accessible and inclusive for all. She is the COO and co-founder of Diabetes Digital, which you'll hear about in this interview. And Wendy has played a crucial role in creating a cutting-edge tech platform that offers specialized nutrition counseling services for people living with diabetes and prediabetes. And it's all through a weight inclusive lens. How cool is that? She's also the co-host of the Diabetes Digital podcast. You may also know her from Food Heaven, the platform and podcast as well. A quick word before we get to this interview with Wendy. Many of you asked me, how am I doing since the Find Your Food Voice book has come out? And I'm doing pretty great. And in a way, it's kind of been anticlimactic because I don't know, I'm not sitting on Oprah's couch or anything, but really it's also been just this really magical experience where this dream has become a reality. And honestly, the book coming out didn't even feel as magical as actually writing the book. Like I really enjoyed the experience of writing. So what I have decided that I want to do is I want to continue to write more than anything. If you don't know me very well, I've done this job of helping people with insulin resistance and PCOS and diabetes for many, many years, decades actually. And something that's happened as I've gotten closer to midlife is I've developed some chronic conditions that make the work that I was doing one-on-one with clients just not accessible for me anymore. Yet writing was something that I found that I could do, and I didn't have any triggers to my chronic health conditions. And so I want to continue to do that. So that brings me to another question many of you have asked me. How can you support me? Well, just know listening to this podcast alone is a huge support because, as you probably get a little annoyed with, listening to podcasts like mine, we do have dynamic ads inserted. So every time someone listens to the podcast, it helps me to make a few pennies off of those dynamic ads. So that helps me to continue to do my writing work and help me support my team. And ordering the book, of course, also helps, along with leaving a rating or review on Amazon or any of those big guys. Goodreads is another one to also leave a rating or review. And I would love honest feedback. It doesn't have to be all sparkles and raves, although if you're feeling those things, definitely put them in the review. But I would love any feedback that you also have about how I can make the book even better. And if you are able to continue to even support me more, the next best thing is to subscribe to my Substack. It's the same name as my book, Find Your Food Voice. And that's basically where I get to continue to go back to my writing life, where I get to write every day. And I'm publishing an essay every week. I just published a very meaty essay on how I have been building an anti-diet culture home. And after 17 years of parenting, I had a lot to say. So it was just part one. Substack like cut me off. It's like, you can't make it any longer than this. So you could subscribe there so you can continue to find more just tools and tips and strategies that I've gathered over the last 25 years on how to live your life, how to manage your health, how to eat food and enjoy it without including the diet industry. So I will put links to all of that in the show notes. And we are now ready to get to this interview with Wendy. We're going to take a very quick ad break, and we'll be right back with my interview with Wendy Lopez. Hey, Wendy, welcome to the show.
Hi, so excited to be here.
I am so glad that we're finally talking, and I know our paths brushed up alongside each other, but now we actually get to have a real chat because we have some similar interests in, I don't know, does insulin unite us? With
Yes, it does.
Is that maybe what it is? I know with the Diabetes Digital program and podcast that you have, PCOS is also a part of that conversation. So I'm excited to unpack the PCOS and diabetes combination. And, from my angle, many people I work with have PCOS, and that fear of diabetes is one of the first things that it's just handed to them at the diagnosis is be afraid of diabetes. And to get us started, I'm curious what you have on your radar about why is there a connection with PCOS and diabetes?
Yeah, the fear mongering is so real, especially when you go into your doctor's visits. And I think that's why it's so real, because it's coming from people in healthcare. And so you're like, okay, well, this is something that I should be, scared about. And it's definitely something to know about. And we can dispel, some of the fear and myths and things like that today. But with PCOS, insulin resistance is one of the key features. And that means that the body cells, they're not responding efficiently to insulin. That could drive up blood sugar levels over time. And when you have chronic insulin resistance, it does increase the risk of developing prediabetes, of developing type 2 diabetes. And research does show that there's an increased risk for people that have PCOS to develop type 2 diabetes. And I mean, it is quite a significant risk.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I saw some research that suggested that more than half of people with PCOS by the age of 40 will develop type 2. And the insulin resistance is also tied to things like increased testosterone production, which is very common in PCOS, dysregulated ovulation. And with PCOS being underdiagnosed, along with conditions like prediabetes and diabetes, a lot of people don't really know about their risk for type 2 diabetes until much later. And they might already have, these conditions. And so that's why it's really important to get your A1C tested yearly, especially if you're at a higher risk for developing either PCOS, prediabetes, or type 2. You can also get your fasting glucose tested, doing things like your lipid panel, your liver functioning tests, since those can also be elevated with PCOS. Trying to do as much preventative work as possible, I think, will help to calm some of the fears around, developing these conditions.
I mean, and just to note for the listener, you did not mention weight at all in those tests. There are so many things that you can kind of monitor to help manage this risk level that's not all on weight. But before we can dive into that, but before we go there, just mentioning all those tests, the one thing that I see that is so unique to the PCOS experience with diabetes is kind of how it unfolds, because of those really high insulin levels, A1C and fasting blood sugar are normal for so long. And so a lot of my clients would tell me, oh, my doctor says that I don't have insulin resistance because my A1C is normal or my blood sugar is normal. I'm like, well, that's really just looking at your blood sugar, and you have so much insulin probably that it's just making it normal. Do you end up having people who are tracking their HOMA IR or that insulin resistance test instead? I don't know. Have you ever used that with clients?
Yeah, it's like that's why it's really important to have a good healthcare team
Yeah.
because I agree. Like, usually you go into the doctor, and if you've had like these symptoms of PCOS for years, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed, it's like they're scratching the surface. They might be doing
Mm-hmm.
just like very basic level testing, and you don't have doctors who are ordering like all these tests that you've mentioned. And so
Mm-hmm.
we do try to work closely with like endocrinologists and primary care providers so that we can advocate for people to get those tests. Because I mean, we can't order them, but you know, we
Yeah, of
can we can
course.
recommend them and say,
Yeah.
based on symptoms or just based on like certain trends. And a lot of people are also like tracking their glucose too, and so they might be
Mm-hmm.
seeing like certain trends that might indicate some insulin resistance. And so pushing for that testing is going to be really important, and also knowing
Mm-hmm.
what those tests are because a lot of people
Yeah.
don't know about them.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. I think it's important too what you mentioned, like there are some ways too we can notice how our body feels,
Yeah.
even with some of those labs. And I have a feeling you see this too, but so many of my clients have a hard time navigating healthcare, period, just because they feel so ashamed of like either their body size or it doesn't feel safe going to the doctor. And so a lot of times we talk about like, are there some things you can do to kind of just notice how your body is feeling to know when you do need to take that step to go to the healthcare provider when you start to feel different and you're not feeling as well. So yeah, I don't know if that's something that you and your clients have ever had to like unpack. I have a feeling it's something you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely with like just like intense fatigue or,
Mhm.
you know, having just like overeating episodes or like really
Mhm.
strong cravings or mood swings. Like those are all
Mhm.
indicative that something is off, either hormonally or like with your
Mhm.
blood sugar fluctuating.
Right. Yeah.
No.
Can we go back to the fear part?
Yeah.
Because that's something that I see as this huge block for people to just access tools for their health because they are so afraid of getting diabetes that it does a couple things that I see again, like end up being these like blocks, like um, being so afraid they're going to get diabetes. So they're doing like a fad diet, or they're so scared to go to the doctor. So they're just avoiding the doctor.
Yeah.
Um, I see that as like really get in the way of a person's relationship with food. What are you noticing on your end?
Same. Yeah. I mean, there's like
Yeah.
so much content on social media, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not even on TikTok, but somehow I'm getting PCOS content from TikTok.
It's wild out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, how is this even getting to me?
Mhm.
And so a lot of this content is coming from people that are speaking from personal experience, not
Mhm.
people that have professional training in PCOS. And a lot of the messages that I've seen push for avoiding carbs and sugar, which is very
Mhm.
similar to like the diabetes nutrition
Mhm.
messaging that I get. It cross correlates a lot.
Mhm.
And really that's the only way that you can manage the condition, that you can prevent diabetes from coming on, is by like cutting out carbs or like severely restricting. And so this can lead to anxiety, to guilt, and to a disordered relationship with food. Carb
Mhm.
restriction for a lot of people backfires because it's such a big food group. And also, like,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
doesn't love carbs? Like,
Yeah.
they're
Exactly.
delicious. So, you know, cutting out so many foods is usually going to backfire because these are foods that we probably grew up eating,
Mhm.
that also fuel our brain. Like, carbs are the brain's preferred fuel source. So that's where you start getting low energy, mood swings. You can't
Mhm.
concentrate. You have blood sugar dysregulation because your glucose is going up and then it's going down, especially if you're having binging episodes because you've been restricting so much.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. And
Yes.
so, and also that ties in with like the yo-yo dieting or the weight cycling, which can be really stressful on the body, where like you go through your period of restriction and then that's not very sustainable. And then you have binging episodes, and your weight starts going up and down. That can actually worsen insulin resistance.
Mhm.
It could
Mhm.
create more stress, more shame, worse health outcomes. And so we really focus on balancing meals with carbohydrates, not, you know, taking them out, but really incorporating
Mhm.
them, incorporating fiber, protein, fat, so that you have more stable blood sugar without all of
Mhm.
this restriction. And I have seen much better results taking on this approach versus like all of the, the trends that are online.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. Something that I've noticed with clients is that they'll come to me already, probably experimenting with some of those TikTok trends that you're describing,
Yeah.
with removing carbohydrates and things like that, and feeling awful, but still thinking that that's the only way to measure blood sugar or to like help lower blood sugar, probably because they may be checking it like right after eating or something like that. And what ends up happening within the 6 months or so of adding foods back in, like eating enough and eating enough carbohydrate, what people will say is they're like, I actually have energy now.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're not having those intense cravings and feeling, yeah, just more at home in their body, probably also sleeping better. You mentioned glucose monitoring, and that's something that I haven't really talked a lot about on this podcast, but I've worked with a few clients with PCOS who've used a continuous glucose monitor, and I'm curious what you've noticed too, because what I've seen is when people have done more of the restricting or just like life happened and they weren't able to eat enough at lunch or a meal or snack or something, it was so directly impacting this
Hmm.
like lower blood sugar and then this really big spike back up and led just from not eating enough. So are you seeing something like that at all with the continuous glucose monitors, or what are you noticing with that in PCOS?
Yeah, I think it's a really helpful tool, but
Mm-hmm.
if you have a history of disorder eating,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's not as helpful. So you kind of have to
Right.
gauge like what your situation is and what effect it's having on you, because you don't want it to be
Mm-hmm.
something that's like an added stress, right? Like sometimes
Yes.
with these trackers, like that would happen to me with the sleep trackers.
Mm.
I would track my sleep and I would become so fixated on it that I wasn't getting good sleep. I was like, I would
Yes.
wake up and I'm like, how did I sleep? And I'm like, okay, I don't need to be like, it's fine, like after a while
Uh-huh.
you kind of get it. So with PCOS, I think it could be really helpful just to see how your body is reacting to certain foods and food combinations,
Food
because
combinations, yeah.
there are like foods that you would be like, you would think on paper, like, oh, this is really going to cause a spike, and it doesn't. And
Yeah,
there's
exactly what I
actually
saw.
there's some interesting research that showed that foods that are more culturally relevant to
Mm-hmm.
someone's background, even if they're a refined carbohydrate, don't
Mm-hmm.
cause the same spike as, like, for example, a white rice compared to a brown rice.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't cause a spike that you would think, even though it's a refined grain. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a helpful tool if you're taking it for what it is, just like information gathering.
Right, right.
And also, if you're a pretty consistent eater and you have PCOS or prediabetes, I would say for type 2, definitely, I think it's helpful to have. But if you're more like in the prediabetes range, or you don't have any of those conditions and you're a consistent eater, the trends tend to pretty much be similar over time. Like, it just kind of gets boring because I've done
Mhm.
it just for like research purposes, so I can
Yeah.
explain to clients how it works, and it
Mhm.
it just kind of like you're kind of just getting this same numbers more or less every
Mhm.
day.
Mhm.
So it's something good to know. Like, if you're like, oh, okay, you eat pretty much more or less the same meals with the time, but if you want to go through a trial, like, oh, let me for 2 weeks just like see what
Yes.
works better, then I think it could work really well.
Yeah, that's what some people that I've worked with have done. And it was for sure this like decision that was carefully made instead of like, let me just do this
Yeah.
because of an eating disorder history. Yeah, you want to make sure that the timing's good. And then also the numbers are going to be used neutrally and not become this other fixation. And also having it be a trial, like really just a couple weeks. And that's all we really needed because we
Mhm.
got enough data from that. So this is a big question I have for you. So
Mhm.
we could have a couple episodes with this one, but like,
Okay.
but we won't. But how are GLP-1s impacting your work these days? Is it making it interesting or?
Oh my God, so interesting, because like more and more people are on these
Mhm.
medications, and so we have to learn more about
Yeah.
them and understand how they're affecting people. And more people who don't have type 2 diabetes. Like, for
Mhm.
example, with Ozempic, it's recommended for people. That's how it's been studied for people with type 2
Mm-hmm.
mostly, but they're being used off label more and more now. So
Yes.
I am always keeping my ear on, any research that's coming out or just like what people's experiences are. And I will say, like, I have worked with Ozempic specifically since it launched, and just kind of like looking at people's trends and side effects and things like that. And the research does show that there is a significant A1C reduction for people
Mm-hmm.
that have type 2 diabetes when they're
Mm-hmm.
on these GLP-1s. With Ozempic, it's a 1.5% reduction, which is significant. And I've worked with people that have type 2 who've done really well on GLP-1s, especially if they're making other adjustments with like
Mm-hmm.
nutrition and movement and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to PCOS, if you don't have type 2, the research is still evolving. It's studied more so with type 2, specifically for Ozempic. And so when it comes to PCOS, the research that's out there is mostly tied to weight loss. And so it's like
Correct. Yeah.
you lose the weight and potentially that can help with insulin resistance. And a lot of people go on these medications for weight loss. And research shows that weight loss associated with the medications, it's not anything super significant. It's anywhere from
Mm-hmm.
like 5 to 10%, which I think as clinicians is important to communicate that, because I think a lot of doctors who are prescribing, they don't communicate that. And then people blame themselves if they're not seeing anything above that percentage. They're like, oh, there's
Yes.
something wrong with me because I'm not losing the weight. And I will say, like, in my personal experience, results have been very mixed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's some
Mm-hmm.
people, they might lose weight and then they plateau. Some people, they don't really lose weight at all. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, they might lose the weight and then it goes back to what it was, or it goes back even higher to what it was before. So, these are all just things to take into account, along with the side effects, which I think is like the biggest
Mm-hmm.
consideration, because the side effects are pretty strong.
Yeah, it's not just like a medication just to like flippantly make a decision about. Yeah, because those are some intense side effects. I'm so glad you mentioned the actual research on how much weight is lost, because I know the way it's dangled and like talked about, even like advertisements. Sometimes I know they have in the fine print those like percentages,
Yeah.
but really what people are taking home is like, this is the thing that's going to really help decrease the significant amount of weight loss. And it's not as much. And so that's important as you're like hearing all of the pros and cons, if the side effects are not worth it, they're not worth it.
Yeah, and also just the sustainability of it, because it's
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen is that once you get off the medication, the weight typically tends to come
Mm-hmm.
back up. And so really
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, is this something that I'm going to be on
Mm-hmm.
forever, like to
Yeah.
maintain this weight? And it's also expensive. Like if insurance
Yes.
plans are not covering GLP-1s for the most part if you only have like PCOS or
Yeah.
prediabetes. And so you have
Yeah.
to pay out of pocket. You have to figure out how to access them.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are getting generic versions that are not really well studied, and we
Yes.
don't really
I'm
know what
scared
the
of
risk
those.
of
Yeah.
we don't know what the risk of that is. So it's all just like it's all developing and unfolding, because it is relatively new. So we'll see. But we do work with people to navigate the side effects if they make the decision to go on a GLP-1, navigating those side effects, making sure that they're nourishing properly, because it really limits your appetite and we don't want people developing deficiencies. So
Yes.
also just making
Yes.
sure that you're properly nourishing throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important, especially for people with PCOS who are curious about their risk for diabetes. I think about, we don't have a lot of long-term data on using GLP-1s and PCOS, of course. We have very little long-term data on PCOS management, period. But
Yeah.
one thing we do know in the general population is like weight cycling, like you mentioned before, is something that puts people at higher risk for things like diabetes. And so if GLP-1s are just leading to weight cycling in the end for you, you just need to know that that could make it even like expedite things.
Mhm.
It certainly is a mixed bag. One of the hardest parts I'm hearing from folks, I have a lot of people in my membership who have been doing non-diet work for a long time, 10, 20 years, and they will sometimes people will talk about their experimentation with GLP-1s to help with their diabetes. And unfortunately, what's happened is then once a doctor sees that on their chart, all of the work they did on advocating for like non-diet care, like please don't weigh me, please don't let me see my
Mm.
weight. It's almost like having the GLP-1 on their chart. It makes like takes all that away. And so all the providers are like, oh, we could talk about weight loss now because you're taking this injection.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
I've been like, let's just make sure that people know that's another like just a thing to keep on your list of like a pro and con. Like you may have to do more advocacy if you're used to getting more weight neutral care. You may notice that starting to
Mm.
slide again, um, which
That's
I
a great
hate.
point. Yeah, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
think about that, but it's true. Like with GLP-1s comes a weight-focused conversation with your
Mm-hmm.
doctor. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're probably going to be getting more and more of that. And if you don't really want to hear that, or you've been doing all this work
Mm-hmm.
to let your provider know that you want weight neutral care, then yeah, that's definitely something to
Yeah.
consider.
Yeah. And I think the other part, when people are getting it covered with insurance, they're noticing that if they don't keep upping the dose for weight loss,
Hmm.
that it's not covered, even though it may be helping at those smaller doses or the lower doses,
Hmm.
which I'm like, oh, it's just like a tangled up mess to me.
Yeah, it's a
So
lot.
it's a
Yeah.
lot. So before we end, Wendy, is there anything that you have in your mind that you wish people with PCOS knew about managing their diabetes risk? Is there anything like you wish their doctors told them or their healthcare providers told them instead of like the stuff that they're getting at this point?
Yeah, yeah. PCOS is a very complex condition similar to diabetes, and it's not your fault. It's not a personal failure. I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of blame and punishment that happens when you get diagnosed with these conditions, and it's like, oh, you ate a certain way or you didn't exercise enough. And the reality is that we don't know exactly why
Hmm.
someone developed PCOS. It could be genetics, it could be environmental factors, it could be underlying insulin resistance. And so instead of approaching it with blame, it's important to get the right support, the right resources. It's not about eliminating carbohydrates, it's about knowing how to make confident food choices with pairing carbohydrates with other foods so that you can stabilize your blood sugar and you're also enjoying the meals that you're eating. Like rigid diets, they don't prevent diabetes. They oftentimes increase stress,
Hmm.
cravings, disordered eating patterns. And there's a lot of weight loss messaging with PCOS, so it's hard. But there's so many other things that you can do to improve insulin sensitivity, like movement, stress reduction, sleep, eating balanced meals, like all of these things. A lot of times are more impactful than
Yes.
nutrition. Like there's so
Yes.
much focus on nutrition.
Hmm.
There's so much that you can do. And like everyone is not in the situation to like approach it from all angles and tackle it all. Like we all have life happening. And so just try to focus on like what are one or two things that you can start doing. And it doesn't have to be a complete overhaul.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. There's so much of a oh gosh, like the threat of diabetes with PCOS. I see so many people going down into really intense, restrictive diets. So I appreciate everything that you said. So in my book that's coming out really soon, and actually by the time someone's listening to this, it's already gonna be out. So hey,
Yeah.
I have in the resource section the Diabetes Digital podcast. I love your podcast with Jessica. So that's one thing that I will put in the show notes. But if someone's wanting to know more about you and the work you're doing, where should we direct them?
Absolutely. So you can go to diabetesdigital.co. We are a
Hmm.
virtual nutrition counseling platform. We are covered by insurance, so most of our patients pay zero out of pocket, and we help manage PCOS, prediabetes, diabetes, other chronic conditions through weight inclusive care. We practice from an intuitive eating and health at every size approach. So, yeah, if you're looking for a dietitian to work with that's covered by insurance, you can check us out.
Awesome. Thank you. It was so great to chat. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Wendy Lopez from Diabetes Digital. Next week, I will be sharing a conversation that I had with Jamie Magdick, who is a dietitian that also is in recovery from an eating disorder. And we are unpacking the experience of pseudo recovery. You know, this podcast cannot happen without a few really important people. Rachel Popick is the genius behind this podcast, just reaching your ears. So thank you, Rachel. And Colleen Brumner is our hype woman extraordinaire. I encourage you to connect with her as well. She helps me behind the scenes to manage a lot of the communication that you and I have. So if you want to continue to unpack the Find Your Food Voice conversation that I wrote about in the book and just get more insight into how to connect and maintain that connection with your food voice, join me on Substack, subscribe to my newsletter, and we'll stay connected that way. So I look forward to being in your ears next week. And until then, take care.